Welcome to Austin Liti Limits, a series where authors talk to authors about books and writing. I'm Scott Simmergren.
And I'm Larry Brill. You know, Scott and I have had our share of successes.
And awards.
His last novel, To Squeeze a Prairie Dog, won 3 book awards. His latest novel, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island, has been getting great reviews.
Larry has won his share of awards too. His latest book is out now, The Printer and the Strumpet. Here at Austin Liti Limits, we're working with our good friends at Book People to introduce readers to our favorite authors.
Well, naturally, during these days of pandemic, we've had to move our author interviews online until the bookstore is up and running again 100%.
In this episode, I had a chance to talk with award-winning Texas author Simon Hahn.
Simon grew up in Plano, Texas. A product of the suburbs, he still had an adventurous spirit. He needed every bit of that when he auditioned for the reality TV show Survivor, and he lasted until the quarterfinals before being eliminated. Simon received his Master of Fine Arts from Vanderbilt University and picked up several fiction awards while writing for publications like The Atlantic and Texas Observer. His novel, Nights When Nothing Happened, has landed on several best-of lists, including Time's 100 must-read books of 2020.
Please welcome to the show, Simon Hahn.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. How's it going in Carrollton with the, what do we call it, snowpocalypse during a pandemic?
Yeah, we're hanging in there. As we're talking about it, but I feel fairly lucky. We have power for now. It's, trying to keep the heating at a minimum, so it's fairly cold, but we're doing okay. How about you?
Doing all right. I've had interviews with some other authors and have talked about the pandemic, but now we're throwing this
I know
historic winter on top of a pandemic. And it's pretty crazy. So when the pandemic started, were you trying to do any writing at that time, or were you getting ready for publication for your novel?
When it started, it was very hard to do any writing. I had already what was I think I was toward the very later stages of like passes. So I was looking at just looking for typos and stuff in the manuscript. There wasn't much else to do. And so at the time I was hoping to start new work, but then the pandemic happened and I just couldn't really focus. So I was actually ended up doing a lot of reading then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did too. I did a lot of reading. My creative well dried up the first 5 or 6 months of the pandemic, but I did do a lot of reading too. So I know what you mean. I love the observations in your book, Nights When Nothing Happened, about Plano, Texas. Was Plano, Texas always going to be the location for this story rather than a fictional town? What was it about Plano that you felt you wanted to put the spotlight on for this particular story?
Yeah, I did want to write specifically about Plano because not only because I grew up there, but I think there's something about Plano that makes it like all the other cookie cutter suburbs, but also something uniquely different. And I wanted to capture that somehow in the book. For example, like I look at the huge immigrant population in Plano, and particularly the Chinese American community. And I think about like a family like the Changs at the center of my novel. They're part of this somewhat insular Chinese immigrant community, but as soon as they step out of that community into the larger Plano, they're largely invisible. And so what does that feel like? And there's just a lot of Plano's got this reputation of being kind of safe and boring. And I was interested in asking, like, okay, safe and boring, but for whom, right? Like it may have been safe and boring for the family at the center of my novel when they started out, but in that kind of an environment, if you make one wrong move, even a very innocent move, uh, suddenly you can become the threat, right? And so those sort of dynamics can turn on you pretty fast. And I think Plano just felt like a setting in which I could explore some of that stuff.
Right. So what is it about? Um, I'm reading in the news now, and this is very recently about the Asian community in San Francisco. I don't know if you've seen this in the news, where there's some folks that are escorting some of the elderly Asians there. Um, and you would think that historically that would be a safe place, right? The West Coast for Asians. Um, why do you think this is? What is it about when this community gets out from their group that um, it's not safe? Why? What is it about Plano you think that insulated community like that um, gets that feeling once they come out?
I think that, yeah, you could look to history first. These sorts of ethnic enclaves, whether it's Plano or San Francisco, Chinatown, they they came out of this need because the Chinese residents were not welcome anywhere else, right? So it
Right.
historically, I would say actually it wasn't a safe place because the early Chinese laborers were seen as threats as well you know um, to white Americans, and they were seen as foreigners, and they were seen as like people who couldn't assimilate, and um, who spoke a different language, and were dangerous, and to their children and to their wives, and so um, it was sort of, these communities were born out of a need to protect themselves, and that is all tied into these, I think, these larger power structures in which um, marginalized people are often like forced to like see each other as competitors, and see each other as enemies, rather than find ways to like work together in solidarity. Um, and I think that is what's happening to an extent in my book, where you have um, these Chinese immigrant characters who found a level of success in the suburb, who have a level of security, but they also know that it's fairly fragile. And um, I think that they really want to protect their space. They want to protect their place in society, and so they want to do whatever it takes to like move the target away from them. So they might try to distance themselves, say, from people who appear in public to be like Muslims, right? Like this book takes place post 9/11, right after 9/11, and so there's that aspect of it. And then I think there's this incident that occurs in my book that makes the central family a kind of target, kind of ostracizes them, right? And they see that even not just white people, but other Asian Americans, their neighbors, are also alienating them, and so
Mm,
it's just this kind of tension that I think tells a bigger story of America, its history and its present.
right. Um, I did relate to a lot of the things in the book, not because I'm obviously not Asian American, but I'm not too far out from my Jewish relatives immigrating to the United States.
Mhm.
And I kept thinking as I was reading the story and watching interviews with you that, this is America's story. I know obviously that I've seen you where they put you on panels where, you're talking about immigrant stories, but this
Sure.
really in the overall arching thing is this is an American story because all of us have come from somewhere, with the exception of the Native Americans. And I think once you get a generation or two past it, a lot of people seem to forget that.
Mhm.
And but my great grandparents immigrated from Poland and Russia, and they were going through similar things too, as well. And so, um, but let's get into some of the writing aspects of your book. So, one point in the story, I'm not going to give too much away because I don't want to give any spoilers. But the father Liang,
Mhm.
Liang, um, he gets into into some trouble with the
Mm.
law. And there's a point where you could have had a court scene and you didn't.
Right,
You just
right.
completely passed over that to the result.
Mm.
And a lesser skilled writer would have jumped wholeheartedly into it and had the procedural for that, but you didn't. What were some of the choices in your mind of not having that play out for the father?
Right. Try to think about how to answer that without spoiling. um,
Right.
but I think that it felt truer to the characters' experiences to leave the story in a little bit of a limbo there, because I don't get me wrong, I love like a good courtroom drama, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not really what this book is about. I think
Sure, I know.
it's
Mm-hmm.
more about like not just in that scene, but it's about but throughout the book, it's about characters who are sort of how they react to the unknown, right? Like they don't how they react to a future that they know is coming, but they don't quite know what's going to happen, right? And what happens to the imagination, and how does the imagination then, you know, sometimes takes people down, you know, paths of paranoia and of um, you know, even violence, but also how the imagination can take people down like paths of connection and intimacy, and so I was really interested in that space of like waiting for something to happen. We don't know what that is, and I think that there are various places in the book where I kind of leave the characters right before the precipice of this big event, um, hopefully to show that like that there is like that the story itself could be about that confusion and could be about that frustration of, you know, the moments before and after rather than the event itself. But
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't blame a reader for feeling a little frustrated about that. I do think that that frustration itself is kind of a subject of the book. But
Sure.
you know, I know that may not click for everyone.
I was thinking though that it almost seemed like I wasn't disappointed that there wasn't a court scene, but it seemed like no matter what was going to happen, it was predestined for him. You know what I mean? Like he
um,
almost wasn't going to have a say. Like he was going to have to suffer anyway.
hmm,
And so I guess I was just kind of curious about you plotting out that particular piece. Made
yeah.
me think that this was going to happen no matter what, since all these events started, that he was going to go
Yeah,
down a
that's
particular
a good
path.
point. I think that like on a craft level, if you've given your reader enough details and enough, you know, character development and like if you've situated the story enough so that they can imagine for themselves what's going to happen, and they may all, each reader may imagine it slightly differently, but if they can all kind of arrive at a general feeling, um then I don't, yeah, it may not be necessary to actually write it down, because I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes letting a reader fill in the blanks can be very
Yes,
powerful. Yeah.
right. So the father to me was the most mysterious character. And I felt like maybe because he didn't know a lot about himself as well, particularly when he was talking, or when scenes would come up about his mother and how mysterious it was for his mother, and it didn't really seem like he knew um, what happened particularly. And then she became like this mythological character, right? Because they said, oh,
Right.
she's on the moon now, and that's where she resides. Um, Tell me a little bit about that as far as fleshing him out. Um, what was it like creating some of that backstory, and how do you use memory as a narrative strategy in your work?
Hmm. I love your observations about Liang, the father. I think that yeah, his childhood was very tumultuous, but what I think really defined it was for him was that, you know, it's a life he lived, but even as an adult he has a very unreliable memory of it, and um there's something that he thinks he witnessed, but then the adults in his life at the time were telling him different versions. Maybe it was to protect him, maybe it was to protect themselves. But as a child, I think it was just deeply traumatizing to like experience something, but then be told that that's not what you experienced, right? And
Hmm.
he had to, then he grew up with that sort of mentality, and I think that made him question his very reality, right?
Right.
And it's weird to then find himself, I think, in a place like Plano, this like supposedly squeaky clean suburb that is also trying to present its own sort of image of itself. And I think for a character like him, it's just like he's just trying to figure out where he is, where his place in the world is, and but then, as you said, like who he is, right, is a big question. Um, and so as far as memory goes, I think that um, I was really interested in having exploring the unreliability of memory, the subjectiveness of memory. That's part of the reason why I also have the book go into four different perspectives, not just with Young, but his wife and his son and his daughter. And sometimes like two characters will remember the same event, but they'll remember it differently. And so I was interested in exploring like what does it mean that we remember it differently? What does that say about ourselves?
Right. So when you were planning out this book, did you just sit down and pants it out, as they say, or did you have notes? Did you build a framework beforehand before you started and have a detailed plan? Do you remember how you tackled it?
Yeah. Well, I did not have a super detailed plan at first. It's a book that sat in my head for a long time before I even put any words down. And I do remember like, I have various documents on my laptop that are like random lines or images or scenes that I think might come up. Most of them didn't, but I actually think I have a fairly bad memory. So I just, whenever something comes up, I just write it down.
Hmm.
Um, it was just a book that I constantly thought about even when I wasn't writing it. And so that was all part of, there was something I think unconscious going on where I was organizing it in my head. But as far as like more uh it's like straightforward organization goes, that happened more during revision. So I needed to just write the draft to figure out what I wanted to say, and then after I could see the whole picture a little bit more clearly, I was able to sort of I did this thing that was very helpful. It was actually my editor who recommended doing it, and because we were making some pretty big changes to the book, and it was just getting a bit unwieldy. So she was like, okay, before you make this big change, which is going to affect every chapter following it, what if you just sort of outlined, the book as it is right now? So
Hmm.
it was a kind of like reverse outline where I had already written the book, but now I needed to see how the various threads connected and spoke to each other. So I then wrote an outline, and then I was able to revise the outline based on the changes I wanted to make, and then I actually sat down to actually do that in the book.
And that kind of leads into my second question for you, which is what is your favorite stage of the writing process? Is it the first draft, the first revision, or the final edit? And for me, it's that first revision, because then once I have that skeleton, then that first revision is like putting the clothes on, and really that's where the magic kind of happens. So what is it for you? Which do you enjoy the most? The first draft,
Yeah.
first revision, or the final edit?
Well, some of those stages like blend together for me where in my drafting I'm often revising. I do a lot of like revising as I go, which makes that initial drafting take forever.
Hmm.
But it's I don't know, it's like a block in my head, that I can't like sometimes move on until I feel good about the sentence that I'm currently working on. Um, and sometimes it's not like that. Like sometimes I'm just like in the zone, and I almost forget that I'm writing, and that's very rare. Like most of drafting feels like a grind, but if I get in that zone, that's really, I really like that feeling, obviously.
That's the best. Yes.
But yeah, but I think that most consistently though I enjoy just revision, pure revision, because
Hmm.
like I can see I have like a pool of options to work from. It's not like, I'm just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like I'm
Hmm.
like I can, it's almost like problem solving at times. Like I can
Right.
figure out, okay, there are these specific issues I need to work on, and here's how I can fix it. And there's a part of my brain that enjoys that as well, and it combines like the more analytical side and the more creative side kind of work together in that way. And so I tend to like revision a lot, and this book was I spent more time revising it than I think I'd spent drafting it. So
All right, so now is the time in the show where we do the lightning round. It's 10 questions. We ask every writer the same questions. It's a format we've taken from Inside the Actors Studio, but it's not theirs. They took it from Marcel Proust, who took it from Bernard Pivot. Are you ready for the lightning round, Simon Hahn?
I am, yes.
Okay. What is your favorite word?
Wool gathering. The word I'll never use in my writing, but
right. The new challenge, where to use wool gathering. What is your least favorite word?
Probably those like words that aren't really words, but people use all the time, like irregardless, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or impactful. Impactful is pretty bad.
Yeah, those are a mouthful. What turns you on?
What turns me on? Kindness.
That is a great answer. What turns you off?
Fake kindness.
What is your idea of happiness?
That I think that if I could articulate that, life would be a lot easier.
Right.
So that's sort of this is maybe cheating, but it's just an ever evolving answer. So I don't think I'll ever know at one point in time. Is that enough, or do you need me to come up with something?
We'll leave that one blank.
Okay.
Who is your favorite author?
That's also an impossible question, but as far as living authors go, I would say Edward P. Jones comes pretty close.
Oh, excellent. All right. If you could be any character of a well-known novel throughout history, who would that be?
I'm trying to think right now. I'm trying to think of characters who seem very warm in their fiction, who have like a nice fireplace. And I don't know if this is super well known, but the writers Cheng Rei Lee and Brian Washington, they're so good at writing about food, and the characters in their books are eating such amazing food all the time. So I would love to be the characters in their books eating the food that they're describing.
Excellent. If what other profession beside your own would you want to attempt?
So I guess secretly, I guess not so secretly now that I'm saying it, but part of me always kind of wanted to be like a dancer, but it's too late for that now. My body is not capable of such contortions.
Dancing with the Stars. You could be on Dancing with the Stars.
I don't know. I don't know if I want to be on that show, but
right.
But yeah, I love. My sister is a dancer. I don't know. It's a really interesting art form to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. What other profession would you least want to do?
Least, so many. Probably off the top of my head, I would say like an ICE agent would be like definitely one I would not want to be. The president of the United States.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely not. All right. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
The check-in desk. If there is I think I would be a little bit unsettled by the fact that there is a check-in desk to begin with, because then the question that would come to me is like, if I have to check in, does that mean I have to check out at some point? So I would probably want God to clarify that point for me before I go on, because it would stress me out a lot.
Excellent, excellent. You and Kevin Wilson, both with the awkwardness at the check-in desk. I like it very much.
What did Kevin Wilson say?
Kevin Wilson said that he hoped that God would just let him by without talking. He would be too uncomfortable for him to talk to God. He would just want to just let him pass on.
I'll talk with God. Yeah, that would be a little, I don't know what I would say. Yeah.
Simon Hahn, thank you very much for being on our show. The new book, Nights When Nothing Happened. Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks for being on our show.